and welcome to the first in the Local Authority Heritage Officer Network series, Heritage Biodiversity Actions for Climate. Today's topic is embedding climate in heritage. Over the course of today and the next 3 Thursdays up until February the 17th, 13 heritage officers from across the Local Authority Heritage Officer Network will present a range of different talks on the ever-important topic of natural heritage in the ever-changing world within which we live today. It will look at what can be done and what has already been done in locations across the country, and will remind us why our heritage is so important from a natural perspective and inspire us to each do what we can. The Local Heritage Officer Network consists of the Heritage Officer from each of Ireland's 31 local authorities, testament to the Heritage Council for establishing the Heritage Officer Programme in 1999 and each and every local authority for supporting it. The Heritage Officer Network, chaired by Dr. Joe Gallagher, Donegal County Council, would like to thank each and every one of you for joining us here this morning, and we hope you will enjoy the morning's proceedings. The session today is kindly being chaired by well-known author and journalist Paddy Woodworth, who's done so much already promoting climate action to audiences far and wide. Paddy, thank you for joining us this morning, and over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Conor. Good morning, everyone. Dear Eve. I'm very excited to be chairing this. I think it's a great topic. And I would just make 2 brief reflections at the beginning, which may or may not be relevant. But it strikes me that we still have a problem with the word heritage and biodiversity. And the problem is that, and even though I've been writing about this for quite a long time myself, I still find myself doing it. When I see the word heritage, I still see a building. And I think you guys have done a fantastic job in trying to broaden the definition, and the Heritage Council obviously has as well, but that we need to recognize that just as our economy is nested within natural systems and not the other way around, so our built heritage is nested within a natural system. And without the natural systems, there is no built heritage, there is no culture. And I think that's what we're moving towards. But we still see the division occurring between heritage biodiversity. And I suppose that's manifested in that, there are now, thank goodness, at long last, heritage officers in each county council. But we still have, I think, only 5 biodiversity officers. Now, I know, Minister, you have already taken action to expand that network and are putting funding in place to do that. But I think that's an interesting question. So we have a heritage officer and we have a biodiversity officer in Fingal, for example, and it can work very well. But these are obviously definitions we need to work through, and obviously climate is impinging on both the natural and built heritage, as we'll see this morning. So that said, I'd just like to welcome Minister of State Malcolm Noonan, who's obviously responsible for local government and heritage, so very relevant here. Minister, you're very welcome, and I'd like to give you the floor.
Gormagot Paddy, agus Bwalem Falcha, so here Corla Gokenya. I want to thank the Local Authority Heritage Officer Network firstly. Paddy has, that's a really interesting proposition that Paddy has put there, and it's really a bigger question that we have to discuss maybe and might be fleshed out over the course of this this webinar series. And again, this is a really important and a timely webinar series on climate change. Climate change is the biggest single threat we face and climate action and action on biodiversity loss is something that I really feel strongly about. It's wonderful to see the enthusiasm of and commitment of our Local Authority Heritage Officer Network. I would expect nothing less in the field of heritage and climate change. And my own department has been working tirelessly in this regard, having published the climate change sectoral adaptation plans for built and archaeological heritage and biodiversity in 2019 and progressing actions under these plans. And some of these actions in 2022, amongst others, our department will be carrying out a condition assessment of a sample of heritage sites, properties in public ownership, working with other sectors and local authorities to identify heritage assets within their remit that may be under threat, directly or indirectly because of climate change, developing guidelines and recommendations for local authorities, and assessing existing communication gaps and strategy for public engagement. Later this year, we'll publish the guidance on improving energy efficiency of traditional buildings, which will show our historic buildings can play their part in climate change mitigation. And many of our heritage officers around the country have been doing tremendous work and have been developing innovative ideas to tackle the climate crisis. And this webinar series provides an opportunity to highlight some of that really important and good work. Through this seminar, the presentation of practical examples of projects that heritage officers are undertaking, we can hopefully bring the climate agenda to a wider audience and encourage others to take on similar projects. This webinar series will also highlight the positive contribution that heritage can make in relation to climate action. Our heritage has powerful solutions to offer that are not always fully understood and appreciated, and it offers empowering examples of how our ancestors thrived in the past while being good stewards of the natural and cultural environment. Both the Local Authority Heritage Officer Network and indeed the heritage sector as a whole have taken and are taking some very positive steps to address climate emergency, some of which we will hear about today and in the forthcoming webinars, which I'm very much looking forward to. The series will take place over the next 4 weeks, each Thursday, and the first seminar, chaired by Paddy Woodward, is entitled Embedding Climate Change in Heritage, and will focus on ways in which we can embed the climate crisis into the heritage agenda. Next week's topic will be wetlands and community and climate, followed by nature-based solutions for climate, and finally, a seminar entitled People, Heritage and Climate. Really, really important topics and a broad range of responses there. As you can see from these list of titles, the series will cover all of these topics, and it's my hope that it will help bringing climate action to the fore and making it more accessible for everybody. We also have our part to play in climate action, and this series will show the positive actions that we can all take together. The work of the Local Authority Heritage Officer Network in the field of climate change is really inspiring, and I would like to reiterate my thanks to them all. I recently had the pleasure of launching the evaluation report for the Local Authority Heritage Officer Programme, and really that spoke to me what we certainly knew already, that it is a really such a positive testament to the incredible work that is taking place across the country. And thankfully now we have a heritage officer in every county in the country. As Paddy said, our next stage will be biodiversity officers. We would like to see a much more expanded heritage division within our local authorities. Hopefully we'll try and achieve as much as we can of that within this programme for government. On a side note, I'd like just to, I'm sure of interest to all of you, is that we will be commencing the pre-legislative scrutiny for the Archaeology and National Monuments Bill later on this evening with the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Housing. I'm really looking forward to it. I have had a good read through it today and yesterday, and it's a really exciting piece of legislation. Again, I just want to thank you all, everybody involved in this series, including the chairs, speakers, the heritage officers, and all involved in organising this event. I know it takes a huge amount of work to put this together at such a worthwhile and worthy cause, and it will help inform our knowledge and our understanding of the interaction between heritage and addressing the climate and biodiversity crises. And I look forward to the outputs of the next 4 series of this really important webinar, and delighted to see so many participants here this morning. So thank you all.
Minister, thank you very much indeed. And as you indicated earlier on, unusually for a politician, you've stayed well within the speaking limit, which is great. But we hope you will be able to stay with us as long as possible, because we will have questions and answers. And just a brief housekeeping note on that. We're not using chat this morning, but we are using Q&A. So if you want to ask a question, obviously, happily with so many attendees, we're not going to be able to take live questions. But if you put in questions into the Q&As, I'll be monitoring them, and the other panelists will be looking at them, and we'll try and get as many in as possible in the end. So now, actually, more or less bang on time, I'd like to introduce Shirley Clerkin, who's Heritage Officer at Monaghan County Council, and her presentation is going to be about the role of Heritage Officers in supporting climate action. Shirley.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. So my talk today is about the role of heritage officers in climate action and supporting climate action. And let me just start this from the beginning so that it goes. Okay. So I suppose, who are the heritage officers and what is our role? As we've said, there are 31 heritage officers in the local authorities. And we very much have a socio-cultural environmental role in that we see participation being at the very core of our work, enabling communities, local authorities and other stakeholders to engage with the tangible, that's the very physical, aspects of heritage and intangible heritage, our language, folklore and traditions of our places towards a sustainable future. So we are future looking. I think that's the first point to get across here. It's about bringing the past into the future. And that's a lovely picture of us all in Abbey Leaks Bog. And what is heritage? And I think Paddy hit on something there at the start. Heritage really is the weaving together of natural and built aspects of our landscape. So it's our landscape, our flora and fauna, our waterways, our wetlands, our bogs, also our social responses to that and our societal remains. So all of our archaeology, of course, the remnants of medieval churches, dolmens, all of the evidence of past societies. And then our new built heritage, our old railway lines, our new architecture, and our historic buildings. But where, of course, is climate in all of this? Well, if you look at these photographs here, you can see, obviously, there's a blanket bog. So the climate's right there. It's embedded in the carbon sink that's there. It's sequestering carbon. It's a biodiversity hotspot, obviously, as well. Then look to the right, you look at the traditional turf cutting and wonder, well, how does that figure in with climate change? Surely that's a loss of a carbon sink, which it is, but there's a traditional practice that might be reflected on there as well. So how do we incorporate that into our talks about climate? Obviously, the old abandoned railway line there that once, of course, facilitated public transport. Many of them are now being reused for active travel. Also then look at the restored church there that's been restored into community use. So rather than building a new community facility, the community transformed themselves and their place by restoring a nationally important building on the architectural register. And then, of course, often our heritage is impacted by climate. So this little Cleven medieval church here has been recently restored under the Community Monument Fund to protect it from the intense rainfall patterns and changing weather that's going to be happening and is already evident through the impacts of climate. So if you look at heritage, you see all of these things are inherently local. They're part of our sense of place, but they can have internationally significant values. And I think that's something very important to bear in mind. So local, but internationally significant always. And if not always internationally significant, they're significant to someone and someone does want to advocate for them. So as I said, heritage has very little, well, it has a lot to do with the past, but in some ways it has very little because we're talking about the present and the future. And this writer, Rodney Harrison, has written a lot on this. And he says that heritage, in fact, has very little to do with the past, but actually involves practices which are concerned with assembling and designing the future. So what we retain, what we remember, what we restore is what we're bringing into the future and will give us those resources in and for the future. And the very inspirational Wellbeing of Future Generations Act from Wales, it looked at the definition of sustainable development and incorporated the cultural well-being of Wales into that act, very much bringing heritage right in there into sustainable development and recognising that cultural behaviours and cultural shifts are also what's required to bring about change right across government, local government, all of our systems, and at a very much our collective and individual level as well. But all of these need to be supported together. But, of course, reality bites on this new planet that we're on called VUCA, this volatile, uncertain, increasingly complex and ambiguous world. And these are the challenges which we're facing at the moment and which have been heralded by, by scientists for the last 30 years, that we have this interconnecting triple planetary crisis, this triple whammy, the biodiversity crisis, the climate change crisis, and the pollution and waste problem. And obviously we feel sometimes that these things are very far away, yet both of these photographs are very local to me in Monaghan. One is a fire on Slieve Bay last year on an SPA, protected area for birds. And there we have some dumping and illegal turf removal on the cross-border area as well. So these are all issues that we need to address. And the work that we're doing in the heritage offices and local authorities, we are working to try to address these issues through our localised, heritage-led approach. So we put in place these heritage plans every 5 years, and we've been doing this from the inception of the Heritage Officer Programme in 1999. And this is just a few snippets out of the Monaghan County Council one, but all of the local authorities have these. And what we're trying to do is lead systems change from within the local authorities by recognising the interconnectivity of all these systems, the environmental, the social, the cultural and the economic systems, and trying to find a way to find solutions and co-benefits of actions. So if we're looking at a graveyard, we're also looking at pollinators. If we're looking at a bog, we're also looking at its ecosystem services and its cultural resonances. If we're looking at maybe a lake, we might be looking also at its crannogs. So trying to embed all of these things together all of the time to build advocacy. We work to collect information and to understand our place in conjunction with local surveyors, in conjunction with specialists, and then to bring that information right back to our local communities and local authorities. We try to mind and conserve and restore our heritage. So that goes right across from vernacular buildings, protected structures, bogs, wetlands, hedgerows. So right across our whole ambit of what heritage means. We are advocating, educating and trying to hand on to transmit our heritage to our future generations towards a sustainable future. So that's what we mean by bringing the past right into the future. On the different types of practices that we use and we've been using for the last 20 years, following on from the innovative programme that was started in 1999, is to put heritage and biodiversity very much at the centre of decision making and very much at the centre of place and sense of place in local communities, whether they're rural or urban. And we want to work and we try to work with different stakeholders, listen to...
We're down to 1 minute, I'm afraid.
Listen to different perspectives, grasp and influence change, and to lead by subsidiarity and co-create innovative solutions, and to collaborate and to cooperate. And heritage is a cultural anchor. And the more you work with heritage, the more rooted we become, the sense of place builds to achieve resilience and cohesiveness in society. And this has been proven. And this enables us to think about big challenges that we face and that we face together, including these little curlews here. So mitigation and adaptation, the local authorities are part, obviously, of the local authority adaptation plans. And we work to respond to actual or expected climate change and its events. And we work to reduce or prevent greenhouse gases and enhance our climate sinks. And over the next 4 weeks, the type of projects that you're going to hear about through this webinar series are listed here on these two lists, including wetland bog restoration, coastal sand dunes, hedgerow surveys and education and management, ecosystem services, pollinator plan actions, loads of nature-based solutions, lots around conservation of archaeological monuments, the reuse of those embodied energies in buildings, town centre first policies is very important to address vacancy and build sustainable towns and villages, and obviously to build the capacity and transformative change that's needed in society through heritage and biodiversity to respond to these big challenges that we face. And that's the end of my presentation, and I'd like to hand on now to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shirley, and thank you again for keeping to time. That's great. I'm not seeing any questions coming in on the Q&A. Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm just not. So just to encourage people as we go on, to start thinking about questions you'd like raised, either general ones or ones particular to particular presentations at the end. So now I'd like to move on to Catherine Casey, Heritage Officer at Leash County Council, who's going to talk about the Abbey Leash Climate Action Project.
Thanks, Paddy. Just for a brief second there, my controls disappeared, so minute of panic in the best laid plans. Thanks very much, Paddy. And what I'm going to try and do this morning, I suppose, is follow on from what Shirley has started to say about the heritage officers and the way that we work with communities and how that can be applied to climate action as well as to other projects. So I'm going to say a bit about a project in Leash that we did in 2020 and 21 that aimed to engage a local community with climate action with support from Creative Ireland, actually working in collaboration with ourselves in the Heritage Office, also with Midland Science and our partners on the ground in Abbey Leak's Tidy Towns. So I just wanted to give a quick summary. I'll talk about the broader policy context for this particular project, the framework and the funding that we used in this case, and give you a bit of detail about some of the key outputs, what we learned along the way, and where projects like this can lead to in the future. So in the broader policy context, I suppose, as Shirley has already alluded to, and as most people who are here this morning have an interest in climate will know, climate disruption is going to have wide-ranging impacts on Ireland's environment, on our society, our economic and our natural resources. And these will all require behavioural, social and systems transformation. And what we're looking to do through our work as heritage officers is to try and enable communities to make these behavioural changes, but also to enable them to use their voice in calling for these systems transformations that are also going to be needed. So exploring then how heritage, culture and the arts sectors can be used to promote dialogue around this issue and explore the issues in a deep way will be an essential part of this transformation process. Following the launch of the previous Climate Action Plan in 2019, it's been superseded now, as we all know, by the more recent plan. But at that time, Creative Ireland commissioned a report into how the cultural and creative sectors can play a role in enabling people to understand, interpret and engage with climate change. And that research found that when developing adaptation strategies, there's a need for meaningful public participation, not just consultation, to ensure the acceptance of adaptation planning and implementation. And this needs or will benefit from a creative approach, should include engagement with communities associated with cultural heritage sites, because they often obviously have a deep connection with and knowledge of these sites, as well as the cultural traditions and pastimes that are affected by adaptations. The link for the full report is worth reading, actually. It's just there, it's on the Creative Ireland website if you want to have a look at it. So following this research then in 2019, the local culture and creativity teams, of which all the heritage officers are a part, were asked to consider local actions for climate engagement at county level. And our Abbey Leaks project was a response to that as part of the Leash culture and creative strategy. So we published an open call for a community to take part, and we were delighted that Abbey Leaks Tidy Towns came on board with us at that point. Then they worked with us in selecting a creative team. I'm having a bit of trouble with my, sorry. They worked with us in selecting a creative team and finalising the brief. And we worked with science communicator, Dr. Neve Shaw. She was appointed in September 2020 to work with the community for 6 months. So many of you will probably know Neve. She's an award-winning science communicator. She's a writer, performer, engineer and scientist, and really, I suppose, embodied all of the things that we were hoping to get in one person, which is pretty unique combination. So the funding for the main project came, the science communicator came from Creative Ireland, as I mentioned, with our partners in Midlands Science, which is a Midlands agency dedicated to engaging people with all aspects of science in the formal and informal education. And we had some valuable contributions in kind from our partners in terms of filming and workshops, and also a huge amount of Abbey Leaks Tidy Towns voluntary time that was put in by those who contributed to the talks, panels and films. And the Climate Action Walk, which is an output of at the end of the residency, was funded by Healthy Ireland. So a range of funding sources went into that. Starting then, the project was obviously hugely affected by COVID. The initial plan was that it would be a huge amount of local engagement. Sorry, my controls are gone completely haywire on me. Sorry. Okay. So our outputs were changed. We intended to have a lot of personal engagement and community engagement when we started looking at the project, but because of the public health restrictions, they were limited, and we had to try and devise a way of fully engaging people online. So starting then initially with initial community meetings in Abbey Leaks, we started focusing on filming and creating outputs that could be shared online when people couldn't meet in person. So we had initial training for Abbey Leaks Tidy Towns and an introductory video that was made to introduce the project to the whole community. This led then in collaboration with the Tidy Towns to an identification of what they felt that people needed to find out. And at the early stages, we started with this Fast Facts video series, which was quick introductions to people about what climate change means, what it means to you, what it means to you and me, what we can all do about it, and then some of the bigger ideas. So the idea of this was to break it down into sort of manageable pieces for people who might not necessarily seek out climate action information, but that would be interested in watching local people talking about it, and very much the focus on the local. Moving on then, we had a series of Science Week panel discussions where we had, we call them local heroes of climate action. Again, local opinion leaders, local people, everybody from the parish priest to a local fashion designer to local businesses, talking about their contributions, what they were doing, what they felt was important in the field of climate action. following the Science Week themes that year, which were themes of protecting the environment, health and quality of life, which all fitted in obviously really well with the idea of climate change. Following that Local Hero series, then we did a second series of talks, and this one featured international speakers on climate change. These were featured again on Facebook and on YouTube during February and March last year. And the theory was that we called it New Approaches to Climate Change. We featured a range of expert national and international speakers, challenging how we looked at our planet and our collective responsibilities as citizens to protect and preserve it. This series was curated by Neve Shaw. It was generally aimed at those with an interest in climate change. So broadening it, I suppose, up from the very local focus that we'd had up to that point and widening it out. And one of the interesting things is we found a drop off in the engagement quite quickly at that point. When we went from the local to the more broader issues, our engagement and our enthusiasm from the people we were trying to target did drop off. Moving on then, we went straight back to the very local, and Neve created with the local community a magazine style program about local wildlife, sustainability, community, heritage and business. This was live streamed on the Abbey Leaks. They have a very strong community Facebook page on Saturday mornings during February and March last year, and it got massive engagement. People from with connections to Leash and Abbey Leaks and Ireland from all over the world were tuning in to hear their local heroes talking about what they were doing. So it worked really well in terms of accessing large numbers of people, and people who probably wouldn't necessarily tune in for, if you'd have said, tune in to learn about climate change. They tuned in to learn about all what was happening in Abbey Leaks, and thousands of people tuned in and watched those videos on Facebook. At the end of the project then, to mark the end of the residency, which normally we had originally hoped would be marked with an exhibition and an artwork of some kind, but we were obviously still constrained by the public health limitations. So we created a climate action walk. This is an interactive walking tour through the town of Abbey Leaks, aimed at engaging the general public about climate change and focusing on the cyclical nature of our planet, and how climate change has impacted on our lives, how it affects us emotionally, and what actions we can all take. So you can just see there at the bottom left, a ceramic tile with one of the fountains of Abbey Leaks was commissioned for each of these sites. There's a separate special QR code built into each of those tiles, and they were put up at 7 different sites at in the town. And when people scan them with their QR code, it takes them to one of 7 specially commissioned video clips that explain different aspects of the problem using animation and some film work. So aspects of like bringing it right down to the basics. So there's the one about the carbon cycle, one about the water cycle. And then there are things about climate anxiety, biodiversity, carbon sinks and bogs, and what we can do, what some of the local solutions might be.
Catherine, you're running up to a minute, I'm afraid.
Perfect. For those who can't come to the town, then there's a story map online as well that has the same videos. So I won't focus too much on the learnings, but I suppose what we found was that well, the flexibility of being able to redesign was important. It meant we had to pivot the whole project from in real life to online. The creative approach, I think, was very important to helping us develop that flexibility and allow us to still deliver what we were hoping to do. We probably could have done with more time for that to allow for more fuller potential, but very much the hyper local and the very local focus. The more local the focus, the greater the engagement that we got. The next steps, the communities in Abbey Leaks are flying on. They've got their energy master plan launched. They're in the Sustainable Energy Communities project. They've won numerous awards from numerous Tidy Towns Awards, Climate Action Awards, Pollinator Awards. The most recent one was the Chambers Ireland Award for Excellence in Local Government. But really from our point of view and from where this heritage series comes from, what we're thinking about is starting conversations about monitoring, about mitigation, about adaptation, and really leveraging those emotional connections to make a focal point for communities, what climate change is going to mean for them on the ground, what they can do for it on the ground, and the collaborative approach that helps people to find their voice, to know what they're asking for, who to ask, and how to ask for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine. Lots of material there, and I'm delighted to see now questions are beginning to flow in. So keep them coming. Some of them can be answered online if they're if they're basic factual ones, but obviously there are questions there that raise points for discussion. So our final presentation is from Christine Baker, Heritage Officer of Fingal County Council, and it's on the impact of climate on Fingal's heritage assets. Christine.
Thanks, Paddy. Just to check, you can all hear that and see it.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Sorry, I'm having control issues now myself. Okay, so to deal with the problem, you have to know what the problem is. Risk assessments are part of the sectorial and local climate change action plans. Ours took inspiration from our friends in Historic Environment Scotland, who had developed a methodology for 200, just over 200 properties in their own care. We gathered a very good project team, including representatives from Geological Survey, Dublin Climate Regional Office, Cherish, our own expertise, and our consultants, our GIS consultants, also brought in their own expertise. And there's a great value in having a multidisciplinary team. Fingal's heritage assets we counted the designated public assets in public and private ownership on land, which totals just over 2,000 individual assets. Now, these can be broken down into archaeological sites and monuments, just over 1,000 of those. So that's everything from tower houses to the Martella Towers. In Fingal, about 40% of our archaeological sites and monuments are subsurface. That means they're below ground. We have 795 structures on the record of protected structures. And again, they range from castles and churches to our vernacular architecture, our industrial heritage, and those associated with our coastline, such as boathouses. We've 127 historic gardens and domain landscapes. This is Newbridge House Domain, and I'll be coming back to that. And 22 geological heritage sites. You might remember this one, Lakshmi, from your geography books as a kid. Of course, some of these designations overlap. For instance, this Holy Well at Mulhuddard is a recorded monument, it is a protected structure, and it is a county geological site. So the methodology applied. Sorry. So the methodology applied was assigning a score based on the topology. There's 100, for instance, there's 113 different monument classifications for archaeological monuments alone. So I was taking that score, scoring that, and assessing that against 6 hazard types. That's fluvial flooding, coastal flooding, groundwater flooding, coastal erosion, and land stability. For all heritage assets are some way affected or at risk from climate change, but at least 248 can be said to be at the higher end of that. All the details of the methodology and the results are available in our report, which is downloadable from fingal.ie. But we also have this fantastic map where you can zoom into your area and look at your assets, and it's color coded in terms of the risk for that. So as you can see from this, coastal erosion scores quite highly along the coast, obviously, but also fluvial flooding, that's from streams and rivers. And just to zone in on the coastal flooding, Fingal is relatively low-lying, which is great if you were in a log boat in the Neolithic or a pirate in the 19th century, but not so good for the 138 heritage assets that are highly exposed to coastal flooding. This is back at Newbridge Domain. And again, you can see this is one of our type sites in terms of, we looked at this very closely. You can see from this breakdown that coastal flooding and fluvial flooding are the 2 biggest risks to this historic domain. If you can see, there's the blue dot to the north represents the Newbridge House itself, and the green dot is Lannistown Castle. So you can see our ancestors knew exactly where to build. One of the things we couldn't capture in terms of the methodology were other risks, such as increased wetter winters, drier summers, and increased wind strength. And these bring with them the risk of disease. Newbridge Domain is one of the few intact 18th century domains in the country. And, you know, this climate change effects will result in the loss of perimeter trees, and will be detrimental not only to the domain itself, the layout of the domain, but also to any built structures that the trees might be near, such as Lannistown Castle, as you can see. Also not addressed is the cumulative impacts on the individual sites. The graveyard at Kilsallaghan here collapsed after several really cold winters and very wet winters, and the medieval burial site was exposed to river erosion and flooding over many years. But thanks to the Community Monuments Fund, the Kilsallaghan graveyard the wall has been rebuilt, and there's been riverbank protection measures installed to prevent any more damage to the medieval cemetery there. So in the face of all this risk, it's what are we going to do? Well, in conjunction with Barta Heritage and supported by the Heritage Council, we developed a pilot, a citizen science pilot, to take positive action in the face of this risk. And it's based on the community monitoring the effects of climate change on those monuments in their own area, you know, things that they might have passed every day on those 5-kilometre walks, you know. To do that, a heritage climate toolkit was developed, laying a very step-by-step consistent method of monitoring the sites within Fingal. And this includes a site monitoring form, very accessible. You can use it on your phone, very easy to use and to upload photos. This was backed up by some training days. So we had an online training day during Heritage Week, which is there again for everyone to download and get involved in. And then a coastal heritage event and a built heritage event on site. So we have a very stalwart group of community archaeology activists, I suppose, in Fingal, and they are constantly tipping away. The project allows for not only the monitoring of the heritage assets in the vicinity, but also to record via the National Monument Service any new sites that might be uncovered after storm events or the like. So all of this, I've gone through it very fast and apologies for that, but all of this is available on the fingal.ie Heritage and Climate Change section of our website. And if you want to get in contact with me, my email's there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christine. I think that's really fascinating material there.
Thanks, Paddy, and to each of our speakers, Shirley, Catherine and Christine, representing the local authorities of Monaghan, Leash and Fingal, respectively. And I think it's fair to say all of us in demonstrating the importance of our collective heritage that we all share. Thank you most sincerely to Minister Malcolm Noonan for joining us. And a sincere thank you also to there's close to 200 people that joined us here this morning as well, which is fantastic. And we do hope that you enjoyed these presentations. As noted at the onset, this morning's presentations have been the first in a series, and the next 3 Thursdays at the same time and place, we'll see many further excellent talks. So February the 3rd, Wetlands, Community and Climate with Heritage Officers Shirley Clarkin, Amanda Pedlow and Deirdre Cunningham. February 10th, on Nature-Based Solutions for Climate with Heritage Officers Deborah Ledwidge, Deirdre Burns and Melanie McQuaid, and February 17th on People, Heritage and Climate with Heritage Officers Siobhan Ryan, Marie Mannion and Nolig Feeney. Thank you all, Mila Buikas, and that concludes this morning's session.